Good morning, everyone. This is really a notable group. Every time I come and see these people with all these titles, I get nervous. You know, I almost started reading off my shopping list here at Cal Ranch instead of the notes on the Upper Verde report. But I have the right page. And so first of all, in the West County here, the city of Prescott's approved an alternative water policy for a temporary policy for this next year. I won't go into details on it, but it solves an immediate problem they had with how to respond to requests for water for new development. There's some indications that they are now thinking more about landscape water conservation. We think that's a good direction. In terms of growth, I think this week, the Forest Service is meeting to decide what to do about the easement exchange for the Yavapai Ranch way up in the northwest corner of Prescott National Forest, that checkerboard land that's kind of northwest of Juniper Mesa Wilderness. Of course, that land exchange was a seminal event for VRBP. That was the issue that created this organization. If that easement exchange goes through, that would give 66-foot wide easements across Forest Service land to the checkerboarded private land that would then be developed. They're envisioning something like 7,000 homes up there using, say, roughly, we could guess 2,500 acre feet of water for domestic purposes, plus whatever commercial is up there, plus whatever irrigation goes on. You know, in the Big Chino, there's no constraints on adding new irrigation. So that could conceivably create a significant water demand in the Upper Big Chino. So we'll find out about that soon. And then another little event happened in the Upper Big Chino. You remember some time ago, Longview Energy, LLC, announced plans for a pump storage project in the far northern part of the Big Chino. They would have two lakes, one up on Pachaco, how do you pronounce that? Pachaco Butte, and another one down in the flatlands, and it would pump water to the upper reservoir when power is cheap at night and release it to the lower one and generate electricity when at peak rates during the day. So they were granted a preliminary permit by FERC, the Federal Energy, our regulatory commission. That's it. And that was granted, it's a 3-year permit granted in 2012, and they had 3 years to apply for a final permit. They just applied for a 2-year extension to that, and it was granted. They've done a lot of work on that. And I have tremendous details, like about 180-page PowerPoint on it if anybody wants more information, but not here. So that project would use 17,000 acre feet of water in the lakes. Evaporation from that would be roughly 1,200 acre feet a year. And so that would be kind of the lower limit for the water consumption there. So demands on the Big Chino water seem to be growing. Now, in terms of the flow in the Upper Verde, the Campbell Ranch gauge, the SRP's low flow gauge at Campbell Ranch is reading 14 this morning. That's low. That's like 3 low from what we usually see there. The Paulding gauge at mile 20 is reading 19, and it goes down to 18 periodically. That's fairly normal in the summertime, and that represents the loss of water from evapotranspiration by plants along in the riparian area along the river. So that's a fairly normal thing. And that 1 CFS flow loss, Tony, is in keeping with the rough calculations that Ed and I have run on that. So that's in the ballpark. The median daily flow at Paulding on this day is 23. That's for the 52-year history of the gauge. And we're at 19. We're losing water. At Perkinsville, the flow is down to about 12. So there's an issue with water and flow in the Upper Verde. So the speaker today is Steve Mauk, and I want to introduce him. But first, I wanted to give just a quick rundown of some of the facts, some of the reasons why we're so concerned with the flow in the Upper Verde. So, why consider growth in the Big Chino? Okay, first of all, the value of the Verde. I'm just going to go through this very quick. These are summary statements, not proofs. We've discussed all these things many times before, and I think what I'm saying is fairly well established. I just wanted to pull it together and remind you of the situation at this point. The value of the Verde, there's a tremendous recreational value, an economic value exceeding $150 million in the Verde Valley for commerce, agriculture, tourism. Tremendous cultural and historic value there. I count 72 sites that would qualify for inclusion under the National Register of Historic Places between Paulden and Clarkdale, 72. That doesn't count the ranching. There's some historic ranch sites in there too. Unique, you know, the Verde is the only surviving, living, perennial river remaining in Arizona. This is the last one. We've used the other ones up for economic development, that's what we do. But this is the last one. The Verde has a wild and scenic section starting at Beasley Flat, extending down to Red Creek. Is that right? Almost a sheep bridge, let's put it that way. And that's 40.5 miles. We have the Fossil Creek Wild and Scenic River that designates 16.5 miles of Fossil Creek before it flows into the Verde. That was designated in 2009, and we have a proposal for an Upper Verde Wild and Scenic River that includes 50 miles. So, a lot of different values there. Tremendous ecological value on the river. There's 2 important bird areas. There's 1 wildlife refuge. 478 vertebrate species is what we counted as part of our biological inventory for the Upper Verde Wild and Scenic River. That's over 2/3 of the total wildlife species count in the state of Arizona. 15 species covered by the ESA. 15 in this watershed. So I'd been saying 10 before, but I really got down on the Fish and Wildlife Service website, came up with this list, which I won't go through, but the Verde is very, very important for southwestern wildlife. So here's a map of the river, starting at Camp Verde. So the wild and scenic starts from here down, but this is then the Middle Verde through the Verde Valley. The area that we're really concerned about is this Upper Verde River area. This is the area that's covered by the proposed wild and scenic river. I want to point out that the area of most concern is this upper 25 miles of the river that comes down to here. That's where Perkinsville is. The thing is that Verde Springs is the sole source of water for this upper 25 miles. And below Perkinsville, a lot of additional water comes in that shows up at the Clarkdale Gauge, which is down here. So just a kind of an orientation for you. Here's Prescott, Highway 89 cuts up to Ash Fork, and I-40 cruises across here. So you have an idea of the river location, what we're talking about. Here it is looking at it on Google Maps. So here's Prescott, Chino Valley. This little dark square here is Prescott Valley, the cross-shaped of development on the land. Here's Williamson Valley, and here's the Big Chino Valley. The Prescott AMA ends about right here. Verde Springs is the source of water for that first 25 miles. Of that water, 80 to 86% of that comes from the Big Chino aquifers. So USGS NARGFM model, the Northern Arizona Regional Groundwater Flow Model. That's what NARGFM means. VRBP and USGS teamed up to do an analysis of middle and upper Verde River flows using that model, and that was published, and there was a great program over in the Verde Valley about it. And without going into all the numbers here, human groundwater uses in the Verde Valley have diminished river flow, is the conclusion that we need to keep in mind. So groundwater pumping is the issue, and one threat to the Verde is the Big Chino Water Ranch, where Prescott and Prescott Valley are making plans to transfer groundwater from the Big Chino into Prescott. CWAG has run some modeling on the Big Chino Water Ranch, and so this then shows our calculations. This is from the VRBP study. So this was what's happened from 1910 up to 2005. If we continue pumping at the past rates until 2110, we lose 21%. If drought continues, we could lose another 7%. If additional pumping goes on up there at a rate of 3% growth per decade for 5 decades, we'll lose another 15%. And this is the Big Chino Water Ranch without mitigation. So the potential reduction here, if you add all these things up from the model, is sizable. This is a matter of some concern. So if we put all this together, as we go down the river, starting at Del Rio, and this is Sierra Club data here. We did a seepage run down the river. This is Perkinsville Bridge. So again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but if all these scenarios come true, we're in trouble. We've just lost 6 miles of the river from mile 19 to 25. We've already lost the first 6 miles from Del Rio Springs down to Verde Springs. So that's why we're concerned about groundwater pumping in the Big Chino. So the Big Chino Water Ranch, they've promised to mitigate their action. Now, there's been no description of what mitigation is. We don't know how that could be done. We certainly want to support that act of mitigation, and if they do mitigate their pumping so that it has no effect on the base flow, that is very good, and that would be a move from the city of Prescott and Prescott Valley that would really go a long ways to protecting the river. So let's assume that that is going to happen. And the other threat up there is groundwater pumping from people that already live there. So this 8,000 acre foot is current agricultural pumping. That's based on some crop water use estimates and acreage surveys that were contained in the last progress report from the city of Prescott on their monitoring project in the Big Chino. They're doing a lot of work up there to study it. Current domestic pumping is about 2,000. We see that current flows are declining. We talked about that at the beginning. And finally, we're left with the idea that the Big Chino is going to grow. There's going to be people moving up there. So Ed Wolf gave a presentation to the Board of Supervisors in March of 2014, 2015. I don't know, the time goes by so quickly, I forget. It was over about a year ago. And this was a slide from his presentation. This was his conclusion. Eventual loss of perennial flow in the Verde River through Perkinsville. Reduction of Verde River base flow in the Verde Valley. This could affect the productivity of the water range. So controlling groundwater pumping in the Big Chino is kind of in everybody's interest. It's in the interest of both sides of the hill. And at this point, the unknown threat is Big Chino growth. And that's what this program is about. So I'd like to introduce Steve Mauk, who is Steve is Director of Development Services for Yavapai County. I've had a lot of conversations with him in his office. We know that he understands this situation, and I think he's got some really good information here for us. So thank you for coming, Steve.
Great, thank you.
You're on.
Appreciate it.
And you can click that side.
Yes, sir. I've been here before. While that opens up, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of what it is I do. My name is Steve Mauk. I'm the Director of Development Services for Yavapai County. The department essentially is charged with the administration and enforcement of all the applicable codes related to construction and development in the unincorporated areas of Yavapai County. So we handle subdividing and building permits and code enforcement and planning functions and all that fun stuff. Little about me, I actually grew up in Cornville, so I have a little historical history with the Verde River and the Oak Creek. I could tell you a lot of stories about time spent on the Verde as a kid, especially at the confluence of Oak Creek and Verde right outside of Cottonwood. One of my favorite stories is the time that Tom Thurman and I were at the bridge starting the canoe race, and we somehow managed to tip the canoe over before the race even started. That was one of several mishaps. I think I broke his hand that day. So some things we're going to consider today are the Big Chino population projections, as Gary has indicated, the county plan for the area, and some of the challenges we're facing. And I'm probably going to throw a concept at you today that is a little outside of the wheelhouse of what you're used to discussing, but I'm going to try to tie what I call unregulated growth to the issues you're having with the Verde River. I hope I'll be successful. So, this is a chart showing the population change in Yavapai County from 1870 to 2010, and you can see it's quite significant. We saw our biggest spurts of growth starting after 1970, but the growth managed to stay within what we'd call the urbanized or corporate boundaries of the cities and towns in Yavapai County. Oh, thanks, you can just set it down there. One of the concepts I'd share with you is during the boom of 2003, 2004 through 7, there was a concept in the planning industry called drive until you qualify, where people could no longer afford to live in the communities they worked because the prices had gotten so out of hand, and so they were willing to drive 30, 40, 50 miles away from their workspaces in order to own a home. And that is where we saw the primary growth in Chino Valley and Paulden start to take off, was through that concept. It's also where whole communities have popped up, cities like Maricopa, Queen Creek, Avondale, Surprise. They all popped up through the drive until you qualify concept. Kind of a strange idea. This is a map showing the population bases in Yavapai County based on the 2010 census. Essentially, the darker the color gets, the more dense the population. So you can easily identify where Prescott Valley, and Cottonwood are there. And then Chino Valley's to the north, where the yellow gets a little darker. And then in the white areas are basically probably federally owned lands that we won't see development. As most of you know, 80% of Yavapai County is publicly owned property. But a fair percentage of that is state land that is trust property that can and will someday be developed. To give you an idea what that could look like, has anybody here ever driven through Anthem? Okay, that used to be a checkerboard of state land, state and private land. So that public land of state land can be developed, and we also know that we can see Forest Service exchanges and things like that where previously undevelopable land becomes developable. Excuse me. So growth projections. On this map, what you see is all the black is basically mostly Forest Service and BLM land. Your light gray shaded stuff is state trust land. Your yellow is incorporated areas, our tribal lands. And then what's left is your white, which is all private. And unfortunately, if you look at this map, you'll note that the biggest opportunity for growth in Yavapai County is right in the area that you guys are discussing today, the Big Chino Basin. This is a chart showing the growth of the basin area over the last 20, 25 years. Basically, you can see what essentially it doubled or tripled almost in 2000. It did triple by 2010, and it just keeps to increase significantly. And the reason I'm showing you these numbers is because the trend right now is I think we're running at about 2.8% projection based on the Cyworm study. So this is the county's land use plan. And what we have is the yellow is what's called city boundaries, basically incorporated boundaries. But what's of interest to you is the red, or the rust color, which is a municipal growth area. A municipal growth area is basically areas that we've identified that are most likely to begin to grow, to begin to develop, and see substantial increases in population. For instance, some of you may know we just approved a Ace Hardware to go into Paulden, all right? Now, 10 years ago or even 20 years ago driving through Paulden, you could never convince me there'd be any business there in a long, long time, but that's what's happening. You know, you're starting to see communities develop into towns, into actual areas with destinations and centers and things like that that increase the attractiveness of moving there. So some of the challenges we're going to talk about today, the first one is unregulated development, and I'm going to show you what that looks like here in a minute. Challenges posed by water assurance requirements. And I'm going to probably flip a real weird concept on you on this one, but we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about exempt wells and on-site wastewater versus recharge and public delivery systems, lack of adequate enforcement on development, and also some Prop 207 issues. I'm going to go into each one of these in great detail. So let's talk about unregulated development real quick. What you see here is two maps. The first one up on the left is the result of development that occurred with no hearing process, no public input process, no opportunity to regulate. We have substandard roads. We have no assurance of water adequacy. We have no drainage analysis. All we have is hard zoning that says each lot needs to be at least 2 acres in size. No other regulatory activity occurred here. And then down below you have what I would call a good actor. You have a subdivision that went through all this, went through the water assurance process, went through the drainage studies, went through building roads that were up to county standards, and it's a well-planned community. That is the two ways that development happens in the unincorporated areas of Arizona, not just Yavapai County, okay? So how does it happen? Well, most unincorporated land in Yavapai County is zoned what we call RCU2A, which essentially is a residential designation with a 2-acre minimum. A developer can take a 640-acre section of land and split it into 16 40-acre parcels and obtain an unsubdivided land public report, and they can do that all with no regulatory purview from the jurisdiction. In this case, Yavapai County. In that case, the developer can sell parcels to 16 individual buyers. So we have 16 buyers that can purchase a 40-acre parcel. If I buy one of those 40-acre parcels, I can then break that down into 10-acre or into 4 10-acre parcels and sell them to 4 different individuals. Then that new buyer I sell the 10-acre parcel to can take that 10-acre and break it down into 5-acre parcels, okay? And what you wind up with is a net result of 322-acre parcels without any regulatory review. And I'm going to show you why that's a problem here in a minute. So here's my 640-acre parcel, and this is what it can end up looking like. This is an interesting case study in that this activity I just showed you, going from 640 acres to numerous, I haven't counted them, but I'd say there's probably about 200 parcels in that square. Anybody want to take a stab at how long it took to happen? 72 hours. So in 72 hours, we went from a 640-acre parcel down to several, say 202-acre parcels, all right? And I'm going to tell you why that concerns me here in a minute. But that is how fast unregulated development can occur. And you can see during the boom of the market, we were doing over 9,000 parcels that were not regulated. They were not reviewed for any compliance with anything. Okay, why does it matter? Okay, so first of all, we leave the buyers with an impression that the land is in a subdivision, creating an assumption that required development standards were addressed. A lot of times in Arizona, you can have development that looks a lot like an approved subdivision, but it's not. And you can also have development, historic development, that's also actually in an approved subdivision, but you wouldn't know it by looking at it, okay? So we have private access roads and easements are typically substandard. A lot of times we have a problem with emergency vehicles, school buses, mail delivery, things like that, getting to people. We have a lack of engineering to control drainage issues. We have a lack of adequate infrastructure. We don't have utilities. We don't have sewage. We don't have water delivery. It can present financing issues. A late trend right now is that if you don't have a formal road maintenance agreement for the private road that services your property, you're in violation of Fannie-Freddie rules and you may not get your loan funded. But more importantly, it causes and exacerbates water adequacy issues. So what happens is this unregulated development precludes controlled development inside the AMA. It exacerbates problem if required statewide, if not balanced with adequate enforcement. And this is the message I really want to send today. And I know some of you have heard me say this before, but I'll be redundant. You've got the AMA, great concept. Thou shalt not subdivide without assurance of water supply. Then you got a developer out here that has 640 acres of land that wants to do something with it. And I have gone to these developers and I've said, really, what can I do to get you to subdivide in a regulated environment in order to assure sound planning practices? And you know what they say? Find me water adequacy or assurance. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist inside the AMA. So the AMA is actually driving people's desire to lot split unregulated as opposed to doing a subdivision. If you do that statewide and require assurance on a statewide level, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, without proper regulatory review and enforcement, do we make the problem worse or do we make the problem better? Does that make sense to everybody? I know it's kind of a weird concept to say maybe the AMA is not working for us because I believe in the concept of the AMA, but in many ways it's making the problem worse because it excuses the developer to pursue unregulated routes. So what happens? We wind up with exempt wells. We wind up with on-site wastewater systems that present a lack of recharge opportunities. We lack general delivery systems of water. We have an inability to promote conservation efforts, and we have the inability to promote sound planning practices. So what we've done here is we've created a scenario, be it through the law or the lack of a law or the lack of adequate enforcement at the state level. We've created a scenario where we, as planners, don't have the ability to compel somebody to put in a good water delivery system. We don't have a method to compel somebody to put in a wastewater system that'll present opportunities to recharge. In fact, we've done just the opposite. We've created a scenario where we've encouraged people to drop exempt wells, another straw in the glass, and septic systems that'll never grant us the opportunity to have adequate recharge. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Just so I'm clear, so if a developer within an AMA, if they can't meet the water assurance requirements, they have the option to just sort of ignore it?
Yeah, and the problem I have with that concept is that I just showed you a scenario where somebody was able to create all those 200 whatever parcels in 72 hours. Well, one of the things in the state law says that you are a subdivider, regardless of how many parcels you create, you are a subdivider if you are acting in concert. And acting in concert is defined as evidence to pursue a corroborated plan, okay? So you have to tell me how I can do 640 acres and bust it down like that in 3 days without acting in concert. Somebody broke the law when this happened. So in the disconnect, I'm going to get there actually, I'm going to hold that thought. So what we wind up with was a lack of balance between adequacy requirements and enforcement of the legal activity. We have a lot of ambiguity in the subdivision laws. And lastly, and more importantly, and if you don't walk away with anything else today, walk away with this. There is a complete lack of appreciation between deficient enforcement of subdivision law and water issues. I said last time when I talked to CWAG, if you're talking to the director of ADWR and you're not and you don't have the director of ADRE at the table, you don't have everybody at the table, okay? Because as long as we create a scenario where this can continue to happen, there's no compelling reason for a developer to do it any differently. Okay, so a lot of times the question is, why don't you zone your way out of it? You know, one of the things we'd like to do is say, okay, all this 2-acre zoning is now 40-acre zoning. Hallelujah, the angels sing and everything's going to be fine, right? Unfortunately, I have Prop 207 that compels us, if we take value away from a property, we have to reimburse the property owner. So if we take zoning and we make it a lower density to reduce growth, we have to compensate the owner of that property for that. That's I don't know how much you know about 207, but that's something that bled over from what I call over-regulatory environments, where people literally got put in a position where they couldn't even build on their property and they lost complete value. So it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that. What are some of the solutions? And I think I'm going to talk to you about what it is that we can be doing differently or at least be aware of. One is that we can promote appreciation for the relationship of water and sound planning practices. Okay? One of the things that Yavapai County has in our subdivision codes is what we call a conservation subdivision, where if you come in and you do certain things a certain way, like cluster the homes and promote open space and put in water delivery systems and put in sewer systems that recharge and put in low water flow devices, maybe rain catchment, things like that, we're actually in a position to increase the density on that parcel, whereby subdividing becomes more profitable, but it also becomes time consuming. We need to codify tangible limitations on unregulated development. The key here, the linchpin to the problem, is my ability to go in and create those 640 acre, or those 40 acre parcels out of the 640 acres, my ability to go in there and split those up completely unregulated. All right, there's no law protecting anybody from me doing that. And then you couple that with ambiguity in the law that makes the additional activity that happened over that 72 hours hard to prove or hard to enforce or hard to interpret, and you couple those with a complete unwillingness to perform enforcement measures at the state level. As a matter of fact, I have a law named after me that basically prohibits me from taking enforcement action. All right? Because I used to do it all the time. I, shut down subdivisions left and right. And I was so good at it that they passed a law saying I couldn't do it anymore. And then we need to promote adequate enforcement of current laws. There needs to be a real discussion about this, because you've got the perfect storm. You've got the you've got the Big Chino, and you have the area that is most ripe for growth. All right? It is where people are going to want to be. It's close to where you work. It's not that far, especially when you're moving here from California and you're used to a 2-hour commute. And now all of a sudden, I'm telling you, you can take 30 minutes and drive to work and look at antelope on the way. It sounds really good and attractive to people, and the prices compared to other markets in the United States are increasingly and very, very favorable. Building costs are lower, permitting costs are lower. there's a lot of good reasons to build out in the Big Chino. Soils are good. And then you couple that with the ability to go in there and stick in a bunch of unregulated wells and septic systems, and you match that to what I just heard, and I'm always concerned when I hear about the flow rates of the Verde, and thinking about, as an Arizona native, already losing 6 miles of river, concerns me. And I don't think it's going to get any better without some help from the state. Now, one of the things I did a year ago was we did float language in a bill that would kind of take that 40-acre linchpin out of the law, but it got shot down. And the reason it got shot down is that many of our smaller counties in Arizona, and especially in the eastern side of the state, don't want to do anything to limit people's ability to grow. They want to promote it. So we have two different, entities at play that want different things. And I know I kind of went through this real quick, but I have found in my history of doing this that I usually get more, and you usually get more, out of not listening to me talk, but me listening to you talk and answering your questions. So I'm going to just offer myself at this point for any questions or comments from the group. The question was, how come the 6 parcel rule is not applicable to the 40-acre parcels or more? And what the law says is the creation of 6 or more parcels, 36 acres or less, are subject to subdivision guidelines. So it doesn't say anywhere there that you can create 36 and not be subject to it. It's kind of written in reverse. Does that help? Yeah, and it's used. And it's a classic case of the law of unintended consequences, because the real concept was we want to provide a venue where the larger landowner can split up his parcel and deed it to his kids, and or maybe sell it to somebody else but not be a subdivider. And instead what has happened is vast tracts of land have been developed in this fashion. If you go down Highway 89A and you take a look to the left as you're heading to Mingus Mountain, 90% of what's going on out there is unregulated development. You have Pronghorn and you have, is it Mingus Foothills, I think? Well, no, you have, but Pronghorn and Mingus Foothills are the only 2 approved subdivisions. And then, yes, you have Coyote Springs, Verde Valley, Prescott Prairie, Mingus Meadows, a new one called Legend Hills. I don't know last time anybody was out that way. I drove by it after about 2 months of not going by it and was blown away at how many houses are out there. All on unregulated wells, all on septic systems. So the comment is, have we done a study as to the economic cost of unregulated subdividing? The answer is no, we have not. Until we feel we have garnered some interest from the state, which is in a very anti-regulatory mode right now, it's going to be very difficult to expend those resources. What we do need to do is at the local level try very hard to increase this awareness of what it's costing us. And even if you can't measure it economically, you're taking a tangible away with that well. You're taking the ability to limit the way people use water, which is a very viable function, I think, and you're taking that away in lieu of profit, to be frank. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, I think I'm going to paraphrase you, why can't we enforce this at the local level? And what they did was they said, essentially, here's the problem. I can investigate an illegal subdivision and I can turn it over to the state. Okay, I can say, here's my findings. If the state chooses not to do anything with it, I can. But I have to rely on the state to be my expert witness, because that's their, that's their expertise. Well, what the law says is that I can't enforce anything that the state is enforcing, and by bringing in my expert witness, the state now becomes the enforcement agency, and I don't. So I can't do anything else, so the law completely hobbles me. Does that make sense? Yeah, so essentially what it did was it took me out of the picture, and it left enforcement at the state level, which is not occurring. the question is, have our state representatives and senators helped to impose regulations? I'm not sure they even are completely on board with this relationship. We need to promote the relationship between water and regulatory review. And you know, I'm a little torn because part of me thinks that if you coupled adequate enforcement with good sound planning practices and you didn't have the water assurance requirement, maybe just an adequacy requirement, that maybe we would get more sound development inside the AMA. I don't know. I'm just putting that out. It's a possibility. I would mention that you do have one official running for office who is a current supervisor who's running for House of Representatives at the state level, who is very cognizant of the issue. I didn't say that. Can I run and punch out real quick and come back in? Yes, sir.
If a developer is unable to get meet assured water requirements, so they choose to divide anyway and ignore that, do they still represent to the buyers that there's adequate water, and if so, is there any legal recourse?
No, as a matter of fact, there's a form called an affidavit of disclosure that's required to be done at the state level, and it actually says, I am not assuring your adequacy, you're serviced by a well, or you're serviced by hauled water, or you're serviced by a water company, or whatever. So it truly is a buyer beware situation. I was telling a story today. We were talking about land fraud and how Arizona back in the 60s was the poster child of land fraud. And thanks to some of those guys, I probably have a job today. But I actually have pictures of people water skiing in Holiday Lake in Paulden. You know, so they would fill lakes up full of water, and then they would take a picture, and then they would let the water all drain out. And we talked about how much things have changed. But I got to tell you, less than 10 years ago, I know of an instance in Mojave County where they chunked up a bunch of property into 40-acre parcels, drilled a 700-foot well, and let the water just spray out, and took pictures of it and said, we have water. Well, yeah, it's 700 feet you have water. But that's, you know, it's really a buyer beware situation. And you start to, I'm going to probably veer off track a little bit, but I want you to appreciate some of the problems we're up against, okay? Yavapai County is an incredibly diverse place. We're diverse economically, geographically, socially. I mean, we run the gamut. It's not uncommon for me 1 minute to be talking to a guy with a $40,000 single wide in Seligman, and the next minute I'm talking to a multimillionaire in Sedona. So you take that, and then you couple it with the concept that when people move to communities, it used to be, when I was a kid, when you move somewhere, you assimilated to the community, okay? Now people are moving here, and they're expecting the community to assimilate to them. And then you take that, and you couple that with the guy from Malibu who lives next to the guy from Montana, and they have totally different ideas of how things ought to be, and you have tension. And this is one of your challenges. People don't get it. This is Arizona, all right? We got to watch the water. People that move here from different places don't understand that concept. And I'll tell you the best story or the best analogy I can use is my family goes back here 4 generations, and I remember being in the grocery store with my grandpa when I was a little kid, and it was raining really hard. And, you know, I learned a long time ago that when it rains, you thank God for the rain, regardless of how fast it's coming down. And there was a lady in line in front of us, and she started complaining about the rain to my grandfather, and my grandfather looked at her and he said, you haven't lived here very long, have you? Because you know better. And so that's the reason I'm telling you this, is because when we start to talk about conservation and sources of water and regulatory oversight, we need to know the tensions of the people we're dealing with, who our audience is. I hope that wasn't too far off base. Yes, sir.
Don't quite know how to phrase the question, but for those of you in the audience, the Prescott Active Management Area is just a small portion of Yavapai County.
Yes.
so that the issue that you're talking about as far as the assured water supply rules, in some ways driving people towards lot splits because they can't get the assured water
Correct.
supply requirement.
Correct.
fulfilled. That's not a driving force in the Big Chino.
I concur with you. However, the reason I bring it up is because every year there, as you know, I'm sure, there is that concept floated. I see a bill every year that says, let's make everybody that subdivides in Arizona get assured supply no matter what. And that's why I bring it up. I don't disagree with you at all. Yeah, thank you. That's a very valid point. I appreciate that. Gary?
Yeah, just to continue the clarification. In the AMA, you have assured water supply rules. Those were not challenged in the last legislative session. Outside of the AMA, a county may adopt an adequate water supply rule. Cochise County has done that. Yuma County and the city of Clarkdale is it statewide. And that then is requires, if the county adopts that, then a subdivider has to get the certificate of adequate water supply.
Right.
Without that, they cannot subdivide. That adequate water supply rule is not intended to protect water resources. It's not intended to protect groundwater. It's not intended to protect rivers and streams. It's intended to be kind of a minimal assurance to buyers.
More of a disclosure.
A disclosure.
Yeah.
Without the adequate water supply rule, in a county that hasn't adopted it, a subdivider can proceed. All they have to do is notify the first buyer of a parcel that there's no adequate water supply through the form that Steve described, and then on you go. That rule was challenged in the state legislature this session.
Yes.
Governor Ducey did veto it. So I just wanted to straighten out a little perception and confusion.
I appreciate that, Gary. Thank you. Yes, sir.
A few weeks back, I attended the Water Issues Committee that Prescott is a subcommittee of the City Council, and they were considering this bridge legislation to get us to the end of the year. And the chairman of that committee said, well, we don't want the heavy-handed government. We want the economy to let the marketplace dictate that kind of a mentality. I see on your charts you've got, we can promote, we can encourage. Only one chart that I see codify. Okay, that's the environment we're in. You fully addressed it. We're in an anti-regulatory environment. What can I do as a citizen, as a grandfather who's worried about his grandchildren? What steps forward in this environment do you recommend that we take that would be constructive towards helping us preserve our water, hopefully work towards sustainable water? What can I do other than go to these meetings and get frustrated?
You know, I can't tell the group what to do. I can tell you what I do. I spend a lot of time trying to heighten the awareness of the problem. And in my opinion, and this is just me, what we lack is a complete disconnect and appreciation for how these two issues interconnect with each other. It's real easy, because I've done it, to sit back and say, okay, we have requirements for water assurance or water adequacy. Okay, good for us. We've done what we need to do. But what we've lost is that ability to appreciate, or maybe we never had it, what the lack of regulatory oversight does to that issue. And I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm kind of a change the world one person at a time. Today I start with me guy. but I think if you walk out of here with some awareness of the problem, that you can intelligently discuss with people, that we've taken a good step. Yes, ma'am.
You know, they say money talks, and that's why I brought up that economic aspect from Pima County. And it seems like maybe Yavapai County could do some of those analyses like Pima County has done very extensively, showing the extremely high costs of unregulated subdivision. And Chuck Huckleberry had spoke about one unregulated subdivision south of Tucson It's just the sheriff's service costs more money than
Mhm.
the whole development brought in to the county coffers. So I think that's one tact one could take,
Sure.
start building up those data and those analyses and get those out there.
I would concur. And I'm more than willing to call Chuck and get some input and put some resources into that study. Yes, sir.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
In terms of framing this issue. Let's say you're king for the day. You can make anything. What would you do, number one? And then number two, would elected officials allow you to do?
Part of the problem, and I don't mean to sound like I'm dodging your question, but part of the problem is that when we consider things like subdivisions and high-use water user permits and things like that, we can't consider water. If we're doing a subdivision and somebody comes to us and says, you know, your adequacy report's not valid, there's no water here, or if you allow this to happen, you're going to drop our well levels, things like that, we cannot take that into consideration. And I would refer you to a really good paper written by a former counterpart of mine. Does anybody here know who Bill Towler is? Yeah, you know Bill. He was a former director of Coconino County Development Services. Bill wrote a really good paper called Poisoning the Well. And it talks about a lawsuit that Coconino County got into because they denied the use of on a property because they didn't feel that there was enough water to service the use. And they stated that on the record. And as soon as they did that, the legal challenge was open, the door was open to say, who are you? You're not experts. You can't deny my permit because of your perception that I may not have enough water. It needs to be demonstrable. And they lost that lawsuit. And so we're very cognizant and careful about not taking that in consideration and realizing that issue lays with ADWR. Now, what would I do? I've never been king for the day, but I think that I would try to find a way, and I know this is a stretch and a real cop-out, to preserve property values and property rights of large landowners and couple that with sound planning practices. And I'm not real clear what that looks like, but I'm not sure this is a black and white issue. I think one of the things that we need to do is to start having these conversations with the development community and making them see, to the lady's point, that when you do invest money in infrastructure and things like that, that the value of your land increases significantly. And then you have to couple that with what somebody might call a real arduous subdivision process, where I can split my land down in 72 acres and go to the bank, or I can spend 6 months dealing with Steve Mauk in Yavapai County trying to get a subdivision approved. Which one do I want to do? Well, the value of subdividing has got to offset that desire to make a quick buck. So that's my answer to you. Yes, sir.
Kind of opposite of what he just asked you. And I think you may have hit on a little bit of it, but could you just summarize what would be the baby steps? What would be the small incremental changes that we could do, each of us, to get to that maybe king for the day? But I don't think that's possible. Like you said, it's not black and white. You think of some baby steps.
Well, I think education, really. I think people need to realize, well, both at the local level and the regulatory level and the policy-making level. But I also think that a great baby step I can take just from this lady here, I don't know your name, ma'am, but hi, Jean Marie, is to perform an economic analysis, but maybe in a little bit different way. Not so much what's it costing the taxpayer, but what's it costing the developer. What can we do for you to make this palatable to work? Do I need an expedited process? Do I need a way for you to be able to do this quicker? You know, what is keeping you from being a subdivider as opposed to a lot split person? You know, so that's something I'm willing to take on. Yes, ma'am.
When this 640 acres was subdivided, if that truly was done in 72 hours, someone had things lined up.
Yep.
So, if I want to buy some of this, and I'm in on this scheme, how many big parcels can I make and subdivide it? Was there like,
How much land you got?
well, if I had 600, I'm selling, or someone's trying to sell 640 acres, and I want to buy 340 acres. Can I do that?
Yes.
Can you limit to how many I can buy?
No.
And I can turn around and but I'm connected with this.
What happened is to give you an idea what this could look like, and it was really frustrating because I handed the state a smoking gun, but what happened was and I'm going to make up the dates because I don't know for sure what they were, but the transaction occurred in April of 2006. And that's when the 40-acre parcels were created. But I came across a survey from December of 2005 showing it busted down into 2-acre parcels. Well, how do you create 2-acre parcels out of a parcel that doesn't exist? Somebody had to be talking to each other. Somebody had to be scheming to make this happen. And then on top of that, they do what they call double escrows, where I never take any money out of my wallet. My 40 acres gets sold to you, but you've already sold the 410s before you bought the 40. And so all you do is take it, sign the deed, and sign the 410s off to somebody else. Well, everybody has to be talking to each other and acting in concert in order for that to happen. And it's a circumvention of the intent of the law, in my opinion. So, was there another question? Yes, sir.
The question of the economic studies came up, which would probably show that there's a cost to the community in having these unregulated developments. But meanwhile, there's Prop 207, which is a big obstacle to actually regulating.
It is. 207 is a tremendous obstacle to regulation. You have to demonstrate that it's in the best interest of the health, welfare, and safety of the public in order to adopt a new regulation. And then you have to hope you don't get sued over it. That is why the approach probably needs to be, discussing with the development community, what can we come up with to make this palatable?
And you did mention that.
Yeah. And one of the problems when you regulate is you get bureaucrats in a room, and I don't mean our elected officials, but I mean people like me. You get them in a room and they decide what's best for everybody, and then they go sell that to somebody. And we forget to ask the very pertinent question, who's not at the table? I don't make a move from a regulatory stance before I've talked to the real estate industry, the construction industry, guys like you. I just don't do it because I have to think about how it's going to affect them. And in an environment where we're handed and mandated so much, ADA, Virginia Graham Baker, fair housing law, state regulations on environmental codes, things like that, we're mandated all these regulations. What we have to maintain and be cognizant of is that our job is to partner with our communities to come up with viable, feasible, sustainable development, not shove things down people's throats. So we have this concept of partnership, facilitation, and advocacy where I can go to a developer and say, what can we do to make this work? Let's partner up, let's team up, and figure out a better way.
So in a sense, what it really comes down to is whether it actually could be more profitable to have infrastructure, public rules, as opposed to wildcats.
As opposed to wildcat splitting, yes.
And I wonder if it actually is.
You have so many factors, and the question was, he wonders if it already is more profitable to wildcat or subdivide. And the problem is you have to have discussions about tying up sums of money for long times and things like that. And so it's splitting property is very lucrative, and so that's unfortunate. So I think there's a balance there. I think you have a discussion with the regulatory, or the development industry about how you can make things better, but at the same time, you have to have a discussion with the regulatory industry about following the minimum requirements of the law and not just ignoring them. So that's my spiel. Yes, sir.
I live in one of those wildcat subdivisions in Cornville, and one of the things we have is the roads, not up the standard road.
Right.
The issue we come up with is, we want to bring it up to county standard. There is such an extreme difference between meeting county standards for roads and meeting what would be what we think could be adequate surface and drainage and so forth.
And that becomes a big gap in terms of trying to do something more sustainable. That cost of the county road standard seems to be a real incentive for lots of people.
And that's one of the issues that gets created, and I know it's not directly a water issue, but it kind of is that when you own a private road, the county cannot by law take that road over unless you've brought it up to county standards. All right, we're forbidden by law to do that. However, what you can do is form an organization through a road improvement district and adopt your own standard. This is what we like, and you can tax yourselves, and you can use that money to maintain that road to that standard. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but I can certainly get you in touch with the right people if you are.
But you could have your own standard that's less than the county.
Yes, but the county will not adopt the road, but you would have the ability to tax the owners within that improvement district to maintain that road up to whatever standard. Let's just say you just want it chip sealed. Then you can tax to that level and hire a contractor to chip seal the road. Okay? Right. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if the video would be available to watch again?
I have no idea.
It will be online. I can't tell you when, but it'll be on the brbbp.org website.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, listen, I want to thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
I want to thank the group for having. Thanks.